Well, good morning. I'm Todd Mangum. I'm privileged to share the Word of God with you this morning. I currently am head of school at Philmont Christian Academy, and I'll kind of follow in the train of where Marie Allen, director of the Indian Valley Nursery School, took us this morning. For me and for Philmont Christian Academy, this was a fantastic week. We cleared 400 students. We had our back-to-school night for Philmont Christian Academy on Friday, and it was fantastic. Children from various races, cultures, backgrounds, economic backgrounds, income levels, joined together for the purpose of educational discipleship at Philmont Christian Academy and fellowshipping together, enjoying one another. It was a fantastic week. I, in preparing this message for this week, thought I was going to come in on a really enthusiastic, happy, high note, but it was a somber week this past week. You saw the message from Pastor Aaron that went out this past week. The events of this past week are part of a train of events. This event this last week with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, particularly heinous, but manifesting just how broken, how depraved, how hatefully, even murderously hateful has become the discourse of our civil discourse, which is almost an oxymoron in our country. Our country needs a refresh, needs a restart. I'm going to submit to you this morning a reset built on biblical foundations. You recall in June, Dr. Dave was preaching that Sunday, and he observed there was a person whose political leanings, doctrinal beliefs, if you Venn diagrammed, probably would come uncomfortably close to my own, maybe to our own, but dressed up as a police officer and visited the homes of progressive Democrat state representatives in Minnesota and murdered them. A month ago, a person who had graduated from a private Catholic Christian school in Minneapolis came back and shot through the windows, the stained glass windows, at people praying in the chapel, including children, killing them. And then this past week, Charlie Kirk. I have to confess, I didn't really know Charlie Kirk. I was not a follower. He's not my generation. I mean, as one. I've got sons who appreciated him, but I knew the name Charlie Kirk, but I didn't know a lot about him until this past week. But I think if you Venn diagrammed our political beliefs, our religious doctrinal beliefs, they don't overlap entirely, and I don't want to get pulled into trying to adjudicate where I agreed with him, where I don't. But if you Venn diagrammed it, a lot of certainly his quote-unquote religious beliefs, he was a self-described, Bible-believing evangelical Christian. Now, he merged it with political views, some of which I'd agree with, some of which I don't, but here's someone, Mormon background, it sounds like, so self-described Christian, from our biblical Christian view, quasi-Christian, cultically, but anyway, disagreed with what he was saying. Concerned about fascism. And so silenced his voice with a bullet, the way a Nazi would. Now, you hear the shameful, painful irony of that. That's what a Nazi does. Silence views that are vigorously disagreed with a bullet. Our country's in bad shape. I'm not going to try to take on solving the issues of the country this morning, solving the issues of political discourse. Over the summer, our elders and executive leadership team worked together and now joined with a consultant in assessing the needs of our church, decided something to the effect of, we need a refresh. We need a reset. It's part of the reason why I'm sharing God's word this morning. Part of the reset is our young pastor, Aaron Meservy, has a job description that entails the job of 2.5 people, something like that. We want to pare it down to the job of 1.5 people. We still got a little Dutchy in us. We want to get our money's worth, but so for the time being, I'm happy to share in taking on some of the preaching on Sunday morning. I, like you, probably am looking forward to Aaron resuming. I hope he resumes the series he was on, Life Together. I was benefiting from that. But we need a reset. We're in process of a refresh, a restart as Grace Bible Church. And in the vein of that reset, that restart, I'm going to take a cue from a legendary NFL coach, Vince Lombardi, whose name some of you know only by the name of a trophy. But he was a legendary coach whose forte was coming into failing, dysfunctional, losing teams and rebuilding them so that they would become winning teams, playoff winning teams, Super Bowl winning teams. You say, is he still around? Could we get him in Philadelphia? No, he's dead. But he was famous for saying, gentlemen, this is a football. Start from the very beginning and build from the basics. Well, taking a cue from him, I'm going to start our message this morning by saying, ladies and gentlemen, this is a Bible. Now, this Bible contains 66 books, 39 of which are Old Testament, 27 of which are New Testament. So I just want to show you this. This would work better in a classroom, okay? But I'm gonna try it. I've got this queued up here. I just want to show you. It's a pretty significant visual, I think. This much of our Bible is New Testament. This much of our God's inspired word, God's revelation for all time, is New Testament. Which means this much of our Bible is Old Testament. Let me just show you one more, all right? This much of our Bible is Gospels. You see that? This much of our Bible is Pentateuch, authored by, under God's inspiration, Moses. So Pentateuch, Torah, Law, Gospels. Now, I'm not going to say that there's more Pentateuch than Gospels, so it's more important. There's more Old Testament than New Testament, so it's more important. I'm not going to argue that thesis. But do you know what I am going to submit? Do you know what I am going to urge hard? We need this portion of our Bible too. So part of what I hope to begin this morning is unfolding how we can recover for meaning, benefit, and application the first 3/4, 4/5 of God's divine revelation to human beings. And specifically, we have one goal this morning: unpacking what this verse does and does not mean. John 1:17. One verse. The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth was established through Jesus Christ. So there is some distinction between Jesus Christ, or there's some sort of conjunction, juxtaposition between Jesus Christ and Moses' law. What is it? And misinterpret this verse, misunderstand this verse, and you can lose 3/4 of your Bible. So I want to unpack it. One verse. Some of you are getting excited. Well, one verse, that'll take about 5 minutes. It's going to take a little bit longer than that. I'll warn you beforehand. But, let's start with a game, okay? Let's unpack this a little bit with a game. The game is, what comes next? Who knows what that is? It's an acorn. What comes next? An oak tree. It does come next. Now, it takes about 50 years. But that acorn, planted in the ground, allowed to grow. Do you see this? I tried to keep it to scale. There's the acorn. That's a human being. I don't know how tall she is. Well, let's say she's 5'5". An acorn, given 50 years in the right environment, fulfilling its design as an acorn, will eventuate in a giant oak tree. It's fun, right? All right, let's play again. All right, acorn becomes oak tree. All right, let's try another one. What's that? That's getting a little tougher. What's this? Okay, we've got some gardeners in the room, some botanists in the room. A what, Jack? It is a tulip bulb, which apparently are hardy, much hardier than the tulip. The tulip is a pretty fragile flower, but bulbs you can transport even across oceans. Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin invested in tulip bulbs. One of them lost a fortune trying it, but anyway, a tulip bulb planted and allowed to eventuate according to its design will grow into a tulip. All right, what's this? It's a caterpillar. What comes next? I hear a couple of things here. A butterfly, okay? And I heard another answer over here. A chrysalis. All right. I hear butterfly, I hear chrysalis. Josh Perry? All right. I hate it when Josh Perry is right about things. But anyway, all right. All right. Now, what comes next after the chrysalis? Howard, all right. The ultimate design of the caterpillar is a butterfly, but it unfolds in stages, becomes a chrysalis, or I'd call it a cocoon. Why is that wrong, Josh? You'll tell me later. All right, chrysalis, I'll go with your term. I'm going to assume you're correct. It eventuates in stages, unfolding stages. And that chrysalis stage, it's almost, It's an unstable stage. I mean, a caterpillar can go like that for a while. A butterfly can go like that for a while. The chrysalis stage is highly transitional, inherently unstable, because it's on the way to something else. So think in terms of law, kingship, prophets. And now we're coming dangerously close to tying the loose ends of where am I going with this. I'm going to suggest to you that the relationship between the law of Moses and the revelation of Jesus Christ, the revelation of God in the Old Testament, is seminal to the revelation of God in the New Testament. That is, the revelation of God in the Old Testament is designed by God in its revelatory design and power, not to stay at that stage, but to grow, develop, and produce the era of Messiah, Messiah King, Messiah Priest, Messiah Prophet. And even when I say Messiah and accompany it with King and accompany it with Priest and accompany it with Prophet, how do we even know what those words mean? They all come from Old Testament revelation. They're designed by God to be seminal to the revelation of God and the New Testament. Now, the acorn does not look much like an oak tree. They look dissimilar. In fact, if you didn't know what an acorn was and you picked it up off the ground, no one asked you how you knew so readily that an acorn becomes an oak tree. I don't know, from elementary school, listening to your mother or grandmother anyway, watching documentaries on PBS or something. But if you picked up an acorn in the wild, you might be surprised that this is going to become a giant, towering tree. But everything in that acorn, every molecule in that acorn is packed with design. Some of it drops off, but kind of like the booster rocket to a rocket, but every aspect of that acorn is designed by God, packed with oak tree potential from the very time that it's a seed, from the very time it's an acorn. Likewise, the tulip bulb doesn't look a lot like a tulip. Not everyone knew that's a tulip bulb. And then likewise, a caterpillar, that looks like a perfectly legitimate animal on its own. But it's designed not to be a caterpillar forever, but to grow, develop, mature, produce a butterfly. So similarly, the revelation of God in the Old Testament is seminal to the revelation of God in the New Testament. A couple more. The revelation of God in the Old Testament lays the groundwork for the revelation of God in the New Testament. Now, Jesus is called the foundation at times in the New Testament, so I want to be careful with this parallel and analogy and parallel principle. The Old Testament is like digging the hole where the foundation will go, but it's dug for the purpose of eventually housing a foundation and larger structure. It lays the groundwork. Or if you want to use a field farmer, agricultural, agrarian kind of parallel, well, before you plant, before you decide, all right, this part of the field is going to be corn, this part of the field is going to be beans, this part of the field is going to be carrots, turnips, whatever. Well, you plant it out, and you lay the groundwork to prepare the ground for the appropriate crops. Well, that's what the Old Testament does in preparation for the New Testament. The revelation of God in the Old Testament not only is seminal to, not only lays the groundwork for, but the revelation of God in the Old Testament provides the framework, the architecture, the structure. The structure like kingship, the structure like priesthood, the structure like prophecy, the structure like organization of community, covenantal community. All of those structures of the Old Testament lay the framework, lay the groundwork for the revelation of God in the New Testament. It gives clear instruction of design and prepares the way for the revelation of God in the New Testament. So it's like unto. Now, kids, before there was GPS, before there were cell phones, this is what we used. This is called a map. A map. And it used to be in folding things that you could unfold and was impossible to refold, or in map books that you would open. But if you were going on a trip from, I don't know, here you are in Lansdale, and you want to visit the Statue of Liberty. Well, you would open up a map, and the map would give you instructions, a framework for, okay, if I'm headed for the Statue of Liberty, this is the path that I will take. This is the reliable direction, road I will take to get there. Oh, that's what the Old Testament does in preparation for the New Testament. Or maybe think of it this way. Anyone know what that is? It's a blueprint. Blueprint for a house. Not the blueprint of my house, but the blueprint of a very nice house. It's got porch, fireplace, bedrooms, anyway. Blueprint for the house. Now, a well-built house starts with a well-designed blueprint. Now, you can't move into the blueprint. You dare not try to use the blueprint illustration of the bathroom to use the bathroom. That's trouble. But it provides the groundwork for this is where you put the bathroom, these are the measurements, these are the proportions. Now, this is a picture of a man at the Grand Canyon looking at his map. Now, he's probably okay. He's probably not the buffoon I'm going to use him for as my illustration here. I'm going to assume at some point he's going to pull his nose out of his map and look at the Grand Canyon itself. But can you imagine if he made his way to the Grand Canyon using this accurate, fully skillfully constructed map and got to the Grand Canyon and continued just to stare at the map? Oh, this is such a beautiful map. It got me right here. How skilled this is. How admiring I am of the map. That, brothers and sisters, is the heart of Jesus' criticism of the Pharisees. In their continuing to look back at the guidelines of Moses when you've got the reality here. He says, you are trying to follow the instructions of Moses. That's what you're priding yourself in, being wonderful Moses followers. But if you were using the map properly, in accordance with its actual design, you would recognize that you've arrived at the Grand Canyon. The prototype has now given way to reality. The problem is not Moses. The problem is not the map. The map is perfectly good. And Moses looked forward to me. The problem's not the map, the problem's not Moses. But the problem is, you've got the full reality here, and you're continuing to refer back to the framework that's proto-full reality. Similarly to the blueprint. Now let me talk a little bit about not the foibles of needing the blueprint, but why the blueprint can continue to be helpful even once the house is built. Linda and I moved into our house 40 years ago. Well, let's call it 40 years ago. 30 years ago we moved. 30, 40 years ago. We moved into the house. At that point, had 3 boys. We were sharing one bathroom upstairs. Yes, it was wonderful. Not so much. We early on investigated how hard would it be to add a bathroom outside our bedroom. I mean, the previous owners had added a section downstairs, converted, we think, a porch into a bathroom. So how hard would it be to do that upstairs off of our bedroom? Well, you know what the contractors, those we contacted to investigate, you know what they referred to? Well, they investigated the house, but they looked at the blueprint. And to a person, every contractor that we contacted said, sure, you can add a bathroom outside your bedroom. It will cost between $100,000 and $150,000 because your house is not designed by its architecture, by its blueprint, to house a bathroom. It doesn't have plumbing, so you'd have to add all the plumbing. Unlike the bathroom that was added downstairs, well, that's on the ground. Outside your bedroom's on the second floor. So you can't just perch a bathroom on stilts or something. You're essentially going to have to dig foundation. That's if you can get the township to approve it. Imagine if we'd ignored all that and said, we're not digging a foundation. We're not spending $100,000. We're going to get whatever shyster's willing to do it. Put a bathroom out, put it on stilts, add some plumbing, add some pipes. It'd be disastrous. And so we have well-meaning Christians in the current day. Looking at the ministry of Jesus and the launch of the kingdom by the Spirit, in which they say, well, circumcision's dropped off. Gospel is now open to Jew and Gentile. What other additions can we make? What other modifications can we make? And brothers and sisters, if you try to make modifications, make additions, without referring to the original blueprint, what Jesus built on, what was seminally framed out, anticipated, that is a dangerous proposition. You're going to end up in a disastrous, maybe well-meaning interpretation of Scripture, well-meaning application of scriptural principles, so you think, but that fails to be undergirded by the groundwork, framework laid out by God from Old Testament to New Testament. So the revelation of God in the Old Testament is seminal to the revelation of God in the New Testament. The revelation of God in the Old Testament lays the groundwork for the revelation of God in the New Testament. The revelation of God in the Old Testament provides framework for the revelation of God in the New Testament. I've got one more that we don't have time for, But if you're looking for extra credit in the quiz that I give later on, the revelation of God in the Old Testament provides heuristic prototypes to illustrate and foreshadow realities that unfold in God's redemptive plan more fully developed and more fully realized in the New Testament. That's a mouthful. I'll say it one more time. The revelation of God in the Old Testament also provides heuristic prototypes, object lessons, ground-laying illustrative realities. But they're prototypes, heuristic prototypes, to illustrate and foreshadow realities that unfold in God's redemptive plan, more fully developed and more fully realized in the New Testament. I've actually got a nice illustration that would make that clear. You would enjoy it. You would be riveted. It takes about 20 minutes, though, and we're not going to do that. But that's a right understanding of Old Testament to New Testament. Let me give you a couple of wrong ones that are common. Some in this congregation may well-meaningly be adopting some of these, may have been taught some of these, or tantamount to these. The revelation of God in the Old Testament was mean and nasty. The revelation of God in the New Testament is loving and gracious. Mean and nasty versus loving and gracious. Wrong-headed. Well-meaning, but wrong-headed. The revelation of God in the Old Testament was harsh and burdensome. Now, there are a couple of statements in the New Testament that talk about relieving Gentile Christians of some of the accoutrements, the burdens. But let's not forget, Deuteronomy closes with God saying to his people specifically, these commandments that I'm giving you today are not too difficult for you, are not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. The problem is not the burdensomeness, the harshness of the law. The problem is with our sinful, rebellious penchant to obey, which the law in itself is powerless to correct. But that's not the problem with the law. That's the problem with our depraved human nature. More on that later on. Not today, but later on. Where the revelation of God in the New Testament is easy and free. The revelation of God in the Old Testament demanded obedience without forgiveness. Boy, this is a common one. Demanded obedience, but no means of forgiveness. That's false. It's prototypical. There's an animal sacrificial system. But the God of the Old Testament is highly forgiving, is highly gracious, is highly loving. Whereas the revelation of God in the New Testament offers forgiveness with no expectation of obedience. Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Now that Jesus has come free from the law, oh, happy condition. I can live as I please and still get remission. That's a perversion. That's a misunderstanding. That is a misconstrual. So what happens if we adopt these, though? Well, you end up with a reading of the Bible and a manifestation of Christianity that is either deformed. Now, deformed. It may not be deadly, but it could be. Or it could be heretical. That is, practicing this form of Christianity is actually damnable, is actually not endearing you to the heart of God. Whoever's taking up guns and bullets, shooting people in the name of their Christianity, has a deformed form of Christianity. I mean, they may be well-meaning. They might be cuckoo, deranged. I mean, that's possible too. But deformed. Or warped. Any carpenter or anyone who has wood floors or wood walls in your house is familiar with what a warped board does. I mean, you can live with it. It's a trip hazard. It's a pain in the neck. It's a form of out of alignment quality. Or at best, anemic. I don't know if you've ever known anyone with anemia. I mean, it can be deadly. But a person with anemia that's lacking iron in their blood, they're weak. They're not able to function at full function. It's weaker than what the design of the human body should be. And adopting some of these wrong-headed understandings of relationship between Old Testament and New Testament ends up with a sweet, seemingly gentle, seemingly gracious and loving New Testament, but anemic. Just last week in the prayer group that I was part of, one of the people in the prayer group, when we moved to the prayer for people in their orbit, said, I have members in my orbit, family member or friend, that has adopted this red letter Christianity. Now, red letter Christianity, that's not all bad. It's originated, I believe, with Tony Campolo, Shane Claiborne, anyway. But it's now degenerated into, I've got a Bible of this much. I've got this much Bible. And so has this anemic, warped, deformed type of Christianity that says, well, Jesus didn't say anything about what kind of sexual orientation people marry, so it's not important. Or you can end up with a Christianity that says, that maybe merges with a political agenda. Anemic too, or warped too. The seminal embryonic revelation of God's design was given through Moses. So how do we read this? The law was given through Moses. Try this on for size. The seminal embryonic revelation of God's design was given through Moses. The character of God was fully embodied and fully conveyed through Jesus Christ. That's the nuance I would suggest. Not mean and nasty burdensomeness came through Moses. Free and easy, forgiveness without expectation of obedience comes through Jesus Christ. No. The seminal embryonic revelation of God's design was given through Moses. The character of God was fully embodied and fully conveyed through Jesus Christ. We set as our agenda this morning, unpacking what one verse means. We're now ready to begin looking at Moses. But this morning we have communion, and we pick up with Moses next week with the introduction of this morning laid out in the framework we've covered. At this point, I'm going to ask Elder Dave Ramage to lead our communion.